Okay, so in this SketchUp tutorial, what I'm going to be doing is illustrating to you how to create a terrain model using Google Earth and SketchUp. We're going to use a couple of plugins that you can get from the extension warehouse. So if you go to the pull down under Window Extension Warehouse, I'm on a Mac here. It'll be a little bit different for a PC. One of the things you want to get is this Bezier curve tool. So if that came up because I was looking at it previously, but just type in Bezier curve and do the search, and you'll see that pop up here. So install that. It's super easy. All you do is click install. It's already in mine, so it says uninstall, but we'll show you how that's being used. Then another one is called the Architect's Toolbox. And so do a search on that. Oh, maybe let's just look at Architect Tools. That's what we want there. And so install that. And this will give us a couple of features that will make our modeling easier. This man here, TomTom, has some fantastic routines. You might look up some others that he has. So make sure you install those two routines. So we're going to start by geolocating the structure, or not structure, but the terrain. So we want to, on the file, pull up Geolocate at location. And when you first bring this up, you have to log into Google. If you need to, you might have to add your password there. So we're going to zoom in to our region. Not sure how close I got there. Okay, it's somewhere in here. There we are. Okay. I want to pick a very mountainous region just so we can really clearly illustrate the terrain. So maybe one of these valleys down here would be good. So let's pull out something through here because this is going to have a great deal of terrain variation. So we pick select region, and we just want to zoom in on the specific area that we're interested in. So let's say that we're going to be looking at this particular region right here. And once you have that approximately correct, say grab, and then that pops up into your model. Now, what we see first off is that it's just a flat kind of image of the screen, image of that terrain. And that is up on your layers here, comes in as Google Earth Snapshot. And if we turn that off, we see that it goes away. But in addition to that, we bring in something called the Google Earth Terrain. And I'm going to turn that off. And that's what we really want, because this is the 3D image of the elevation of this. So what we want to do is turn this into something that we can edit and that we can work with. To start with, I'm going to go back to that snapshot. And most of this work I'm going to do in parallel projection. So I'm going to turn this to parallel. And now I can look in plan. And it's a little bit cockeyed on the screen here. So I'm going to create a box around this, but I want it to be aligned to this. So I'm going to use the axis tool here so that we can get this approximately aligned in the right orientation. Doesn't have to be perfect, but at least close. Now you see the axes are rotated here. So if I right click on this axis line, I can say align view. And now, whoops, back to plan here. A line view, and now it's square with the terrain model. So my first step here is to draw a rectangle that I'm going to use as my basis here. Now there's fundamental rules that we want to work with here in SketchUp. And so those rules are, I'll use this text tool here, 1, always draw on layer 0. Group or make components. This is really important. It's the only way to separate things in SketchUp. And then thirdly, move elements we'll move the elements to their layers that are needed for visibility control. Layers in SketchUp do not separate elements, they only control visibility. Groups and components separate elements. So the first thing I'm going to do here is make this into a group. And now I can look at this in elevation. If I open this group, I'm going to push-pull this, but let's do this in an axon. And what I want to do, now I can turn off my Google Earth snapshot and turn on the terrain. What I want to do is basically enclose all of this terrain within this box. So about like that. And so now I've got an object that encapsulates that terrain. So I'm going to use this object to cut this terrain and make some lines. So I'm going to go ahead and reopen this terrain model. Not the terrain model, I'm going to open the box that I just created. And I'm going to select all things, just say Control A to select everything, or Command A on a Mac. And right click and say Intersect Faces with the model. And what that's done is that it is intersected. You can see the line here. It is intersected with that Google Earth terrain. And so now I'm going to delete these elements that are on the top, and what I'm left with is the base of my model. And maybe I'll just pull that down just a tad lower. Okay, so now I'm going to go into elevation view. This is why we need this to be parallel plane. And I'm going to select only that cut, because I'm going to use that to cut the terrain. So now I'm going to copy that, Control C or Command C on a Mac. And now I go into the terrain model. Alright, once we have made that copy, what we've done is copied that perimeter of the top of this cut that we made. So notice that the terrain model up here at Google Earth Terrain, that's locked. So I'm going to right click and then unlock that, and then double click to open up that group. And now I want to do paste in place. Paste in place copies the thing that was previously copied, or paste the thing that was previously copied into exactly the same position. If you do paste, then it floats around wherever you want it. So I want to paste in place, and what that does is it automatically intersects with the model. You can see there's a line here. Before that was done, if I undo that paste, you see that we have one object, and then paste in place, and now we have two objects, and that creates a trim line, and I can simply delete that. And now we have a nice clean object here. So this thing on the bottom, these are two different groups. I'm going to create a new layer here and call this my terrain model base, and then move this object onto the terrain model base. And I'm also going to stay on layer 0 for what I'm drawing. Now the fun part, I'm going to create a rectangle down here. And now I can turn off my terrain model base. What I want are those rectangles there. And so let's go ahead and make this a group. Now I'm going to make multiple copies of this vertically so that it intersects with this model. And these are going to be for our contour lines. So we use the move command, and I'm going to, oops, I better move the whole thing. Use the move command, but instead of simply moving it, I'm going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key on a Mac, and let's look at a front-end view of this. And that makes a copy. And so I'm going to make multiple copies of this. Now the number of copies depends on the scale of the terrain model that you have and the thickness of material that you use to make your cross sections. You have to keep in mind that you want to scale properly both vertically and horizontally, or vertically and in plan in your XY axis. So if I'm using 1/8 inch thick cardboard, then my scale would be 1/8 inch equals 1 foot 0, which is the same as 1 inch equals 8 feet. So we'll say we make this at 16 feet, because this is a pretty steep thing. Yours won't likely be this much, but this is just exaggerated. So I'm going to say 16 feet, just type that in. And we see that down at the bottom right there it says length 16 feet. And then I'm going to do a bunch of these. So let's try 50 times. And so we get a whole bunch of those spaced across here, and it's not quite enough, so let's try 60, and almost to the top, so about 64x should do it. How about 63? 62 is it. Okay, so we're done there. And actually we don't even need these last couple on the bottom here, so let's go ahead and delete those because they don't intersect with our model at all. Let's take off these last 3. So now here's the fun part. This cube is going to become the cutting line to intersect with the model. So it's a group, it's one thing, and the terrain is another thing. So now I'm right-clicking on this and say Intersect Faces with Model. And I'm actually done with this cube. I'm going to delete it. And look at that, we've got contour lines. And those contour lines follow all along the intersection of that cube and the site model. And they're at 16 feet on center. If I turn off the terrain, you can see that I have spatial contour models. Now, I want to group these, make it into a group, and let's call this contour lines. And because there's a great tendency to make errors in this process, what I like to do is make a copy of this and I'm going to take this one and put it onto contour lines. Turn that off and it goes away. Now I'm going to paste in place, and I've got my same thing in exactly the same place. And let's make contour lines dupe. And that's simply in case I make a mistake. And move that onto contour lines dupe. And we can see they exactly overlap. We don't see anything when I turn this on and off. It's because they're in exactly the same place. So now with these lines, I'm going to open this group and use Control or Command A for selecting all. And I want to use my sandbox tool. So you'll find this on the tool palette, sandbox. We have to have SketchUp Pro for this. And we have to have SketchUp Pro for any of these add-ons. And pop up the toolbar, which is down here. And the top tool is to create a surface from contours. So we're going to run that routine. And this takes a few seconds here. So I'll probably cut this out of the video. Alright, so that took about 2 minutes to do the surface. And you'll see now, I'm going to turn off the contour lines, that what we have, actually I have to go back to my group here, that actually got created inside of the group here. So I want to pull this out. I'm going to cut that. And I'm going to create a new layer called contour surface. And I do want this to be on that layer, so let's make that active for this time. And paste in place. Okay, and now we turn off the contour lines. We see that we have a surface. And I'll change back to layer 0 because I'm going to do some other stuff to create. So we have an exact replica of our surface. Now it's a little bit different than the terrain. If I turn on the Google Earth terrain, you'll see it doesn't quite match. It's got a different polygon mesh. If I view my hidden geometry, you can see that the contour lines that we created here are based on more like triangles, and the Google Earth terrain they're also triangles, but they're a different kind of shape. This, by the way, in civil engineering and surveying, this particular type of construction is called a triangulated interpolated network, or a TIN, T-I-N. And that's how we model terrain in 3D. So we don't normally see this stuff, just see the surface. Now what I'd like to do is actually have this appear like the terrain model. I want to have the same image on there. So I'm going to activate the snapshot, and I'm actually going to paint this surface here with the texture that we see down there. So I'm going to open up the paint bucket tool, and when I open up the color picker, If I hold down the Control and Shift key simultaneously, I get an eyedropper, and I'm going to drop onto that surface there. Picks up that color. And now if I go into the object here, into this group, it's picked up that color. I can open up my paint bucket again and paint that surface with that texture. Now in the back surface, I'm actually going to paint that with transparency. So let's pick our standard colors here. And pick up a translucent, and I like to use this translucent gray. I'm going to paint the back side of that translucent, and it's a trick you can use to see on the bottom side because each side of a SketchUp model has a different transparency or a different surface. And now I can turn off that snapshot, and we can see that our constructed terrain has the texture applied to it, and it's also transparent. It helps us see underneath. And if I turn on those contour lines, it matches our contour exactly. So that's to get the surface. Now we need to have something that we can take and form into our three-dimensional cutting objects. And now I'm going to turn off my contour surface